Hi. The thing about greatness is where do you begin? So, with a poem such as Mont Blanc by Percy Bysshe Shelley, it's difficult to navigate where to start. There's just so much here, there's so much richness, and it's an incredibly cinematographic poem. It's like someone took a camera and, a cinematographer went out and recorded the landscape or something, and then went inside the mind of the speaker and recorded the landscape of the speaker as he was looking at this landscape. So let me begin this brief video by saying first a little bit about the context of this poem. So I have a book in which this poem is collected, and Shelley's Poetry and Prose. And the first paragraph that introduces this poem says, "Composition on Mont Blanc began at the end of July 1816, when the Shelleys and Claremont toured the magnificent countryside of the Chamonix Valley at the foot of Europe's highest mountain, Mont Blanc. Shelley completed drafting the poem sometime before the end of August in a notebook, and it was first published in 1817 at the end of the Shelleys' History of a 6 Weeks Tour publication. So who were the Shelleys? Mary Shelley, who is married to Percy Bysshe Shelley, the man who wrote this poem, wrote Frankenstein. So she's very famous for having begun a science fiction, or maybe begun the science fiction tradition. Mary Shelley, was the daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote Vindication on the Rights of Women and died 11 days after giving birth to Mary, who married Percy Bysshe Shelley, who was a devout atheist and was shunned by his community in England, and lived a very sort of scandalous life of that time. He would die of drowning at an early age. I believe he was 30, in Italy. So that's a little bit of background. And this poem takes place when Percy Bysshe Shelley is on a bridge overlooking a massive river, the Arve, A-R-V-E, and contemplating the influence or influx or intersection between the human mind and the physical world. So cinematographic, like cinema, in terms of cinema, this poem has so much to offer, and I just want to focus on that more than anything else. Again, I always read the poem out loud. I've read this poem maybe 100 times. It's just so rich and so dense, it's still hard to get my mind around it. But reading out loud is key. I can hear the sounds. I can hear the mind behind the words coursing through the poem. And somehow through sound, I can also imagine better the imagery. I can see things better when I can hear it. So I think this poem enacts three of the cinema terms very, very well. One is the panoramic shot, one is the close-up, and the third is a little less clear, but deep focus. So if we pay attention, especially to the panorama shot and the close-up, we can see how this poem moves into focus and out of focus and up close and far, and takes in the universe and comes down to this man standing there looking, and looks at the face of the mountain, and the mountain itself becomes sort of a character, a face of Greta Garbo, the face of Regina King when in the Beale Street movie, when it close up pans in on her. And I feel like These influencings are at the center of this poem. These movements of mind are at the center of this poem. First stanza: the everlasting universe of things flows through the mind and rolls its rapid waves, now dark, now glittering, now reflecting gloom, now lending splendor. From where secret springs the source of human thought its tribute brings, of waters. And here I am, over the water looking. We could say that that shows, those lines also show a fourth option here, the jump cut. So I jump from now dark, now glittering, now reflecting gloom, now lending splendor, and then here I am. This movement is camera work. I mean, it's an amazing shift of perspective in very, very quick succession, which is the sense of what a jump cut does. And so I have a lot going on at the very, very beginning of the poem. And then if I scroll down and look at some later lines, even the next part 2, lines 14 through 15, which are not marked in your copy, but I'll read the whole section too. Thus thou, ravine of Arve, speaking directly to the river, dark, deep ravine, thou many-colored, many-voiced vale. And these lines are pentameter. So I've got 5 or 10 syllables, basically 5 accented syllables per line. So it's not free verse, but it's blank verse, since it's pentameter, iambic pentameter, but it's unrhymed. Thus thou, ravine of Arve, dark deep ravine, thou many-colored, many-voiced vale, over whose pines and crags and caverns sail fast cloud shadows and sunbeams. Awful scene. Awful doesn't mean horrible. It means massively difficult for me to imagine with my small life, my small human brain. But we're out there in the universe suddenly, right? And that is a panoramic moment. So the way that the mind is taken out of the self and over the landscape and into the cloud shadows and sunbeams. So that's a really good example of how the panoramic is working in this poem. And then also down below, and this is line 57, which is about in the 3rd section, I also see the panoramic and then coming into a close-up. And the close-up is of the mountain, not of the person. So the mountain enacts personhood in part in this poem. So part 3 begins, some say that gleams of a remoter world visit the soul in sleep, that death is slumber, and that it shapes the busy thoughts outnumber of those who wake and live. I look on high, has some unknown omnipotence unfurled the veil of life and death? Or do I lie and dream? And does the mightier world of sleep spread far around and inaccessibly it circles? For the very spirit fails, driven like a homeless cloud from steep to steep, that vanishes among the viewless gales. So we're up in the infinite sky again, and the word infinite is used in the next line. Far, far above, piercing the infinite sky, boom, Mont Blanc appears. The visage of the mountain, the face of the mountain. It's as if we're watching a film, and suddenly last summer, let's say, and we see the broader landscape around Elizabeth Taylor. We then go in, which is it's happening in a mental institution. Then we go into her room, and then the camera pans right up to her face, and the entire screen is taken up by the beauty of Elizabeth Taylor's face. It's an incredible moment in cinema, and she is sleeping. And so and the camera stays with her face for some time. So here we have, instead of the enclosure of a building or of an institution, and then in further enclosure of a room, we have an opening out and out, and in the infinite sky, the infinite space of the clouds, and what's happening in terms of turbulence, and everything moving and coming down suddenly to the face of the mountain. So we're moving between the panorama and the close-up. So in our own poems, to look, are we playing with space? Are we allowing for the language to take things far away and then close up, or just remaining close up? Are we staying with one perspective? Can I shift perspectives in the writing of my poems? We also have, in terms of close up, the feeble brook of line 7 that I mentioned. Okay, so line 7 it says as a feeble brook will oft assume in the wild woods. Okay, so the feeble brook is one example of a close-up. Along with, if we look on line 98, which is in part 4 of the poem, the part that begins, the fields, the lakes, the forests, and the streams, ocean, and all the living things that dwell within the daedal earth, lightning and rain. And look how the mind of this persona, this speaker, is again taking in the world, right? And looking at the broadest perspective possible. It's as if Shelley's playing with how far can I move out of myself and into the vastness of the universe, and then return to this landscape. And in these lines, line 98 says, naked countenance of earth. So we come back after the torpor of the year, the feeble dreams, and we move down, and he's talking about the closed, like the ice of this landscape has closed the buds and closed the leaves, and they contain within them the life that's going to be reborn whenever they open. And then we have remote, serene, and inaccessible, and this, the naked countenance of the earth, on which I gaze. So it's kind of a double close-up. The naked countenance of the earth is one face, if you will, and then me gazing is another face. And so we've moved from this vast universal perspective back to this minuteness of the singular. And that kind of motion is what compels my interest in this poem as much as anything else. The back and forth, the shift of perspective, for all of us to consider, am I able to do this in my own writing? Which is the reason why I'm having you look at this poem. Thanks for listening.